Bursa Malaysia achieved an important milestone in March this year with the inaugural auction of carbon credits on the Bursa Carbon Exchange, or BCX. This is a nascent but important step as VCMs are a crucial mechanism to aid corporate players in reducing their carbon footprints. It's with pleasure that I invite on stage Dr. Wei-nee Chen, Head of Carbon Market at Bursa Malaysia, to learn more about plans to strengthen the impact of the BCX. This conversation will be moderated by Mr. Lu Kin Han, Senior Vice President and Head of Group Strategy and Performance at MIDF. And without further ado, I'm pleased to hand over the floor to Kin Han.
Thank you. Thank you, Shazana. Ladies and gentlemen, for this session, we have a very distinguished speaker here with us. I think if you are from the green space or the energy space, Dr. Wei-nee needs no further introduction. But for those of you who are not, let me give it a try. Okay, Dr. Wei-nee hails from Sarawak and has a bachelor's degree in computer science from the University of Canterbury. She also has an MBA from University Tun Abdul Razak, as well as a doctorate of business administration from UKM. Dr. Wei-nee has tons of corporate experience, but I actually first got to know her when I was in the renewable energy space. Back then, she was shaping the industry as Chief Strategy Officer at SEDA Malaysia, the regulator. Since then, she has tried her hand at energy transition with Hibiscus Petroleum, and now she is EVP and Head of Carbon Markets at Bursa Malaysia, in charge of the Bursa Carbon Exchange. So thank you, Dr. Wei-nee, for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Kin Han. I think it's a real privilege to be back in this MIDF Green Conference for the second time. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah. So, Dr. Wei-nee, when we were drafting setting out the agenda for this conference, right, I think what we realized was a lot of our clients were asking us about the BCX because they heard that we had participated in it. They wanted to find out more. So we thought, what better way to do this than to invite you on board to come and tell us a bit more about it. So I think perhaps my first question to get the ball rolling on this, right, is can you tell us a bit more about the BCX and why it's important for Malaysia in terms of offsetting carbon emissions?
Thank you very much, Kin Han. I think first and foremost, I would really much want to thank and commend MIDF. Just now, I think the MC was actually talking about the auction. Thank you so much for being a supporter of the auction. But I think I'm just going back to why the government set up this voluntary carbon market initiative. I think the government, I have been with the government for the longest time. For 15 years, I was serving the Ministry of Energy in Putrajaya. And we have tried, we have come from a carrot approach in terms of trying to move up this energy transition. So it's always the carrot approach, the applying of the feed-in tariff that moves on to the LSS, the NEM, and the CELCO, which the other earlier presenters have actually alluded to. But I think there is that much that you can do with the renewables and the energy efficiency space, and it is a very commendable space. But there is a final frontier whereby it's going to be very effective in this, energy transition. And honestly, we've been really inundated with the topic of energy transition and climate change for especially the last COVID period. But putting a price on carbon is really the final nail on how we can actually propel these decarbonizing efforts. So I think the government realized that we do need to finally confer that price, a price on carbon. And the government also need to do it in a very gentle and a phased manner. So that's why in October 2021, the government through the budget 2022 have announced that Bursa will actually implement this BCM initiative. There will be the operator of a carbon exchange, but more importantly, moving forward, the Malaysian government will also look into a compliance market. So just to very quickly give you some distinction between compliance and voluntary carbon market, what is being traded in a voluntary carbon market is basically carbon credits where emissions reduction have taken place. As versus in a compliance market, it can be either carbon tax or it can be an emissions trading scheme. Essentially, you pay a carbon price because of how much emissions you are not supposed to emit, but you have emit, therefore you have to pay a price for it. So these are the very strong differences between compliance and voluntary. But of course, voluntary, as the word implies, there's no regulation. You do it on your own accord. But of course, in a compliance mechanism, if you are under a compliance companies, then of course you are subjected to that particular payment. So I think when the government puts up a Bursa Carbon Exchange, the first thing that the government need to do is to, why did the government have to do it? Because the government realized that if we have a local exchange in your backyard, it will bring a heightened sense of awareness that there is a carbon market that we are going to move into. Now, 15 years ago, Kin Han, under the days of Kyoto Protocol and under the CDM days, Malaysia actually did have a rather vibrant carbon market. We have about 150 projects registered under the CDM. About 80% are from the palm oil mill sector. But since the price collapsed in the carbon credits back about 10 years ago, this particular industry has disseminated. And of course, they have moved on. They've moved on to the renewables. They've moved on to the energy efficiency, energy management. But today, we are trying to revive back the whole industry. It has been, I think, quite a challenge. And that's why yesterday we had one of the starting session. We had a biogas roundtable to basically try to moot up a VCM ecosystem. So I think just to also give you some updates, of course, you might be aware of, is that December last year, we launched our Bursa Carbon Exchange. We are very proud to inform that the BCX is actually the world's first Sharia compliant carbon exchange. And of course, in March, exactly 3 months ago, today we have our auctions. So maybe this is just to give you a main gist of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wei-nee, for the background, especially for the explanation of the difference between a compliance market and a voluntary market. So, I mean, since you ended your last comment on saying that we had the inaugural auction in March, and I think this was brought up by the minister, his keynote earlier, and a couple of panels earlier also spoke about this. I guess maybe you can shed some light on, since it was your first attempt and one of the early ones in the region, right? What are your key takeaways from this exercise, and what did you learn from it?
Thanks. Yeah, so our auction, we had it 3 months ago. I think even though it was a small and humble auction, but we were actually quite surprised by how the outcome of it essentially aligns with an international narratives. So first and foremost, what we have auctioned is carbon credits that we have sourced from outside of Malaysia, 100,000 from nature-based and 50,000 from the tech-based specifically from the biogas sector. So the first thing that we have noticed is that more than half of the buyers of the carbon credits, these companies come from the financial sector. And if you look at the World Bank in terms of how the companies, which sector are the most forefront in terms of embracing the ESG, they are really the financial sector. They are the sectors that are powerful agent of change. And we were quite surprised that in Malaysia, and of course MIDF being one of them, we have a strong representation from the financial sector. So we were quite surprised how even in the Malaysia, within our own context, we are actually quite aligned in terms of the sector that is actually ESG compliant. Secondly, of the insights that we've also gained is that of the carbon intensive sector, and we find it quite interesting, the sector that actually took part in it was actually from the oil and gas sector. So if we look at World Bank, how they have ranked the sectors that are ESG compliant, it is also very interesting that the oil and gas sector was actually ranking in second. So it is really quite aligning in terms of our findings as well. So for our auction, the companies from the oil and gas that took part in the auction was from Petronas, of course, as well as Yinsun. And incidentally, TMB is in the room. I think they should be still in the room. from the power sector, there was actually no participant at all. Even though Bursa, we try to engage very hard, TMB, Malakov, especially those ones with a lot of coal assets. But we noticed that the power utilities were actually significantly missing in terms of this taking part in this auction. But of course, we do hope that in subsequent auction, the power utilities will be actually taking part in it. And we felt also, why is it that the oil and gas was in this sector was primarily because the oil and gas sector, they are very much into commodity trading. In fact, if you look at the big oil companies, a lot of them have already carbon trading desks. They are already trading carbon as a commodity. And so they are very well versed in this. And maybe also because, for the oil and gas sector, they are much more easier in terms of passing through the cost. Like, for example, for the likes of, Petronas, when their customer requests for a LNG carbon neutral cargo, then of course the cost will be passed out to them. Maybe in Malaysia, where electricity tariff is highly regulated, maybe the cost is not easily passed through, could be one of the reasons. But of course, for the electricity sector, from my 15 years experience in the Ministry of Energy, doing an energy transition in that sector, compared with the oil and gas sector, really the oil and gas sector is a very hard to abate sector. They do not have a lot of alternatives when it comes to economic ways of decarbonizing. Actually, I just come back from Putrajaya. There is a working group discussion on the NDC roadmap, and they were discussing about all the different sectorials when it comes to decarbonizing. And I was happened to be in the oil and gas sector. My interest is still there. And the oil and gas sector, it is very apparent they know how to decarbonize. The big question is, how do they make an economic sense out of it? So I think that's where the carbon market is one very big solutions from them. Either it could be from a compliance market point of view or from a voluntary carbon market point of view. So I think the other insights to the auction is actually of the two types of carbon credit that was actually auctioned, the biogas, which is the technology base, it was actually oversubscribed. And it was, the pricing was that the technology base was actually almost four times cheaper compared to the nature base. The nature base cleared at 68 ringgit, whereas the biogas cleared at 1850. So I think our conclusion to that was that during the book order exercise, most of the companies was telling us that, we will go for nature base. But when it comes to the actual, implementation of this auction, the companies actually pivoted and moved over to take up more of the tech base. So our conclusion possibly is that Malaysian companies are still largely very price sensitive when it comes to purchasing of the carbon credits. And the other insights is also compared to the auctions that was carried out, let's say, for example, in Singapore, whereby there was a mix of local as well as international. For Malaysia, 100% of our corporates who actually took part, they are from Malaysia. So international community, they were really very excited. Then they come back to Bursa and said that it looks like as though, the Malaysian corporates are ready to be purchasers of the offsets. And they view it very positively that, the Malaysian corporates are truly very progressive. So I'm going to stop here and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that was very insightful, Dr. Wei-nee. Looking at the screen here, there are several questions from Slido, but let me ask you one last question first. I think one of the questions that we get from our clients is, what's next for BCX, right? What are the new initiatives coming up? And more importantly, when is the next auction?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think just to also update the participants here is that what we are doing now for Bursa is that we are developing our trading platform. And our trading platform will offer spot trading as well as off-market transactions. And this platform should be ready before end of the year. Yeah. And correctly, as you pointed out about the auction, I think one of the comments that we've received is that why do we only have global credits that is being traded in the last auction? What happens to the Malaysian projects? So as it is at the moment, I think one of the very challenging tasks that's been actually given to Bursa is that we are not just an operator of a platform. You know, our CEO always mentioned that it is always easy to implement or operate a platform, but the bigger challenge is that we have to ensure that when the supermarket is open, there are actually products on the shelf. Yeah. So, and for Bursa, it is not our aspirations to open a supermarket and we only get all the global credits. We do want to promote our own local credits as well. So I think one positive and good point is that in the state of Sabah, there is a nature-based project that is actually undergoing verification. And if if Vera is going to ease out its bottleneck, then we might be able to have an auction before end of the year. Yeah. And if we do so, we would be very proud because it is a nature-based and it is a very high quality. That particular nature-based Red Plus project has a triple goal in terms of the CCB labeling. CCB labeling refers to the climate, community, and biodiversity. It is an aided labeling to actually provide core benefits over and above a plain vanilla products. So this is what we are looking at the moment. So that's why I think, King Han, it is very important that for us, we are looking at facilitating an ecosystem. Besides looking at just having organized roundtables and workshop, what Bursa is also doing in our initiatives is that we are trying to promote awareness. Now, I've always read on LinkedIn, and I get very worried because there are people who are very excited about the Malaysian carbon market, which is a good thing in it of itself. But the point is that there's been a lot of fake, misleading information that is being posted. I remember seeing one of them that says that Bursa will actually buy all your carbon credits and then we will on sale. So that is not true. We do not work like a single buyer in the electricity sector that actually buys all your carbon credits. So that's why for Bursa, we organize on monthly session webinars and also training sessions. And we have also earlier on this year signed a memorandum of collaboration with MGTC, Malaysian Green Tech and Climate Change Cooperation, a government agency under the NREC. And under that particular collaboration, we are developing a BCM handbook. Yeah, there's been quite a lot of investors coming to us and saying that we want to develop projects in Malaysia, carbon projects. The key thing is how do we go about to do that? So that's why we are coming up with that handbook. And we hope that the handbook will be launched by October of this year. Aside that, we are also coming up together with MGTC with this BCM directory. There's been a lot of questions that's been posed to us. Who are the who's that we can turn to within this particular sector? Who are the carbon consultants, the potential validation verification body? And lastly, of course, on the 5th of October, Bursa will be having our own inaugural carbon market forum that we will also try to have more of such engagements with the participants. So yeah, basically in a nutshell, these are the initiatives.
Okay, thank you. I think we look forward to the spot market, the next auction, as well as the carbon market forum. Right. Let's take some questions from the crowd. I think one of the top questions on Slido right now is your comment about the rumor about carbon credit is a sham due to accusation of the carbon credits approved did not represent real greenhouse gas emissions. I suspect this question is referring to the recent Vera scandal, right, which culminated in the resignation of the Vera CEO. Can you comment about this, especially since the BCX projects are verified by Vera?
Thank you very much. I get this question. This is the third time of the week that I've received this question. So, I could go on for a very long time about this. Yeah. I think this basically came from Guardian article and it can be addressed in many ways. I think, first of all, is the credence of the ones who actually gave such kind of findings. we have to question about, there are actually a lot of rebuttal on that in terms of the methodology that's been used to provide that kind of assessment, in terms of the rigor of the peer review that was given. Even for Bursa, we were very concerned when this news came up. So we engaged international stakeholders to actually find out about their feedback as well. In particular, we also engaged carbon rating companies like the B0 and the Selvera to find out what their findings are, because they do a lot of this nature-based. By the way, these are all only related to nature-based, yeah. And from their findings, you know, the disputed figure of over 90% was really a very wild allegations. So I think it is good that there are actually positive comments coming out of it. We always have to see the spirit and the intent that goes into carrying out this kind of comments. Of course, this is still an evolving space. It is an evolving space whereby we need to have a lot of improvement. But we must realize that if we keep on criticizing offsets as being bad, what other options do we have? Offsets are never treated as the only solution. It is treated as one of the solutions. And if this kind of green shaming, green hushing continues on, the end result is that you will drive companies to inaction. Now, I want to talk about this because there was also another, green shaming on Delta Air recently. Delta Air actually spends over 100 million, more than 100 million, to buy offsets to ensure that, they reach a certain level of pledge neutrality in terms of their flights. In sectors that are hard to abate, if you continue to do this kind of green shaming to them, you are trying to tell them, stop doing anything. Now, the key thing about the climate, as shown in the IPCC report, in the 6th assessment report, we are very clear that the time that is given to us is less than 10 years of 50% probability of not bursting our 1.5 degrees Celsius. Mother Earth is not going to care about how your methodology goes, whether it is greenwashing or not. It's what are the actions that we are taking today. It may not be a perfect action. I can tell you, if you implement a national project, if you implement a single project of its own, if you can even get it off the ground, you are very lucky. If you can get it 80% perfect, that is a very good. But you should never let perfection stand of its way in terms of climate inaction, largely because we have run out of time. And I can see that we have really run out of time.
Thank you, Dr. Wei-nee. I think, notwithstanding the timekeeper saying we've run out of time, one last question, perhaps. I think because there's already regional carbon exchanges existing, BCX is not the first one. There's one in Singapore, there's carbon exchanges in UK. Maybe you can elaborate, why is there a need for one in Malaysia? Notwithstanding that ours is the first Sharia compliant one, do we really need one in Malaysia?
Yeah, good question. Actually, I haven't finished my last question. So I'm just going to cover one point. There is an international body, there is an international watchdog called the Integrity Council for BCM. They are coming up with actually a guideline, a framework that will guide on the quality of the carbon credits. So in as much as we have very fragmented carbon standards, there are international watchdogs that is actually trying to uphold that kind of quality. The UN, under the Article 6, they are also trying to come out with the standards. So actually, international bodies are there to continue on to actually safeguard these particular measures, okay? But moving on to the last question about the exchanges, I do realize, of course, there are many exchanges that are actually happening in, not just in Singapore, but also in Indonesia and also in Thailand. But we have to understand what is the main focus for us. I think the main focus for us, for the government, why they want to set up a Bursa Carbon Exchange, is really because when you have your own exchange in your backyard, it will produce a heightened awareness about carbon market as an opportunity. And the opportunity is not just for corporates to buy carbon credits, and that is very misleading. You know, it's always just buy, it's never just to buy. You can use the VCM platform to do a cost recovery on decarbonizing projects that will prepare you a time for compliance. You can use the carbon trading platform for another avenue for your carbon trading arm. You can use this exchange for multiple purposes. And if that is the purpose of the government, it has already succeeded. Our exchange is not even fully implemented. We only have one auction. Our platform will only be ready by the end of the year. But throughout the whole year up to now, there has been a lot of interest. Suddenly there has been a spur of interest. There have been more and more people coming to us. How can we take part in it? So in it of itself, the government has achieved it. And we can be a very significant producer of high quality carbon credits today. When we talk about exporting fossil fuel like Petronas selling their oil and gas, of course, these are significant revenue to us. But in a world of an energy transition, whereby towards 2050, the consumption of oil will drop tremendously, we have to ask ourselves, what is the commodity that will replace? And this is what we one of them. Yeah, and we have to start today because renewables have gotten this far, not because it is an overnight. I was with it 15 years ago. It has taken all this time. Today, the carbon market will take its time, and we need to start right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope the crowd found this useful, and I hope we answered your questions. I think we look forward to more exciting announcements from the Bursa team on upcoming BCX initiatives.